All right, how's it going, y'all? So in front of me, I have what I believe is the single most unique and interesting NAS out there. Honestly, just about period. This right here is the Blackmagic Cloud Max, and it is a NAS with 12 NVMe SSDs in there, no option for redundant RAID, only RAID 0, with a 100 gigabit connection on the back, an SDI port, and a DC power supply option. I will wager that you cannot find a more unique NAS than this. We're going to talk about what it is, who uses it, should you use it, and really what it's set up for and what kind of performance we can get out of it. Okay, so I actually had a client reach out to me and ask me if I'd seen this thing, and I had not, and then I looked into it. I was like, wow, this is really interesting. Reached out to Blackmagic. They sent me over this copy for review, and I will be sending it back. So I do not get to keep it, but it's not sponsored by them or anything like that. And honestly, this thing is fascinating, and it's for a very specific workflow that is really outside of what even most video productions will ever use. So if you're not familiar with the company, Blackmagic Design is one of those kind of cool, innovative companies, and they do a ton of work in the large film and like on-set video production stuff. They go all the way from making cameras, all the way to making DaVinci Resolve, the software to edit those in. And one of the stops on this that they've recently created is their own built-in NAS. They even have a network switch as well that pairs with this. It is a very fascinating ecosystem, but it's really focused on massive TV studios. Live productions is their real bread and butter for at least their cameras as well as their overall softwares. When I do my live streams, I use one of their stream decks, which just will stream straight to YouTube and do a whole bunch of stuff all on a really small package. And they do a ton of stuff like that. And that is where this fits in. So this right here is a small rack mount NAS that's got 12 NVMe drives in there. And this thing is really set up for video production, and I believe on-set video production and the super short, tight turnaround stuff associated with that. You look at this thing and it is just completely different than anything you've seen. So they've got like this nice screen right here. I'll show that all in a little bit here. But on the back is where stuff gets really interesting in my opinion. So first off, they've got a 100 gigabit Ethernet connection. That is a QSFP plus port, which is a massive, massive amount of throughput. And so I bought this thing right here. One of the cool things about 100 gigabit Ethernet is the fact that you can split it off into 4 25 gigabit SFP plus ports. And that's what this is. One QSFP 100 gig port and 4 25 gig ports on the back. Unfortunately for myself, I was unable to get that to work. It would appear as though that this specific port only works at 100 gig or 10 gig as far as I can tell from the spec sheet. It is not able to use these breakout connections. When I plugged it in, it only blinked red. No connection was working at all. And I couldn't even plug it into any of my 25 gigabit gear to get it to work. So I was hoping to originally be able to see how much this thing could push through with 25 gig speeds, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that, so we are stuck to just using multi-threaded 10 gigabit connections, which I was able to still push a lot of data through this thing. Maxing out pretty much everything I can do, I was able to push like 1.8 gigabit in and 1.8 gigabit out across multiple computers to this thing. As far as I can tell, it probably could have done it a good bit more than that, but I was only able to test that because I only have 2 computers I was able to get these 10 gigabit connections on for testing right now. I'd love to add it into a 100 gigabit setup I am working on later on, but we'll see if I still have it by the time that is all set up. So that is the 100 gigabit Ethernet port, and the switch that they sell that goes kind of perfectly along with it also has 2 100 gigabit QSFP plus connections on it, so you just be able to DAC cable those and get a string of these. The next thing that I truly believe has never been on a NAS before is this right here. This is what's called an SDI port, and it is right next to the HDMI port. So for those of you who are not super familiar with the video production industry, especially the live video production industry, everything is routed through SDI. For absolute simplicity's sake, when you're thinking about SDI, think about it as another way of carrying video, similar to HDMI or DVI. It is really able to do a lot more, faster throughputs, can be converted to fiber, whole bunch of stuff like that. But SDI is really just another way of pushing video out. And so the HDMI port and the SDI port both do the exact same thing. And really what they give you is a very interesting monitor that shows you how full the thing is, as well as what kind of connections are going on to it. It is really interesting using this thing because it is set up for film production. So what this thing is really set up for is to be in a rack of audio and video equipment with monitors everywhere. What you would be doing in a production environment for something like this is you would have a rack of equipment, and all of that equipment is normally running over probably SDI, because that is the kind of standard for live production. And it will basically have an entire rack with a bunch of screens on it that can tell you what's going on. So you would route this to one of those screens, and then you would be able to see exactly what's going on, who's pushing files through, how full we are, how much space is being taken up, all those kinds of things, all directly on this device, all on an on-screen display without having to log into a computer. All of this gear is really designed to be basically just shown on a rack with a bunch of different screens, so you can just at a glance see exactly what you need without trying to figure out how to log into a machine, because this is all live production stuff. It is all really, really, really fast. You don't need to be messing around with a lot of complicated stuff. Look at the screen, see what is going on. And so the overall workflow for something like this is really looking at something that you can use with live production. Basically, as soon as it is recorded to, you would also probably have editors basically throwing together dailies to make sure that everything's looking good, and that way you're constantly getting feedback. There's a whole workflow built into this, but it's all really based off that super short turnaround time stuff. So another thing I mentioned earlier, this does not have any kind of redundant RAID options. This doesn't even have any RAID options whatsoever. It is built-in RAID 0, and that is it. You can't even see the drive health status of any one of the built-in drives or anything like that. Out of the box, it's by far the easiest setup, but it gives you 0 options to configure any of your storage settings, and that is really the intended market for this. When you're talking about these massive video productions, that's actually not that crazy. That's because everything already has redundancy built in. And whenever you're working off of shared storage like this in a video production house, you would be surprised how often I work with editors who say, yeah, we don't need any kind of redundancy. These are just short-lived clips. And we literally, before we put them on the NAS, we've got a spare entire hard drive of it. This often will probably just be used for something like a scratch disk, where yes, it'd be annoying if the thing failed, but there is an entire copy saved somewhere else in most cases. And for those other cases, it has a very easy integration to other cloud backup options directly built in. And as is, RAID is not a backup, and especially when you're looking at SSDs, I'll be honest with you, SSDs do not fail that often, especially compared to mechanical hard drives. I've yet to ever have any of my SSDs fail, knocking on wood, but it is one of those cases where it is a bit different. And for productions like this, you are looking for the fastest possible speed, and by not having to do any kind of parity math, you can get that a lot easier by just striping everything with a RAID 0. Now, when you're operating in these conditions, you do have to understand that. You do have to understand that if a single one of these SSDs goes bad, you basically have to restore from backups. There's no other options here. And for people who understand that and need these speeds, great. But it is just one of those things to remember, and it does surprise me that there's 0 RAID options whatsoever on this thing. I should also mention that this is really one of the first versions of these systems that Blackmagic has made. They just started making these things, so a lot of this is likely going to change in the future as any product develops. But this is it. The last thing I failed to mention is they've got 4 10 gigabit ports on the back. It is really designed just plug and play, works great. You can just plug your computer directly into it and have multiple computers plugged directly into it. Great for working on sets and things like that, where you don't want to set up a network, you don't want a router, you don't want to have to worry about network switches. You want it something that is so light like this that you can just set on your desk, turn it on, plug it into your computer's Ethernet jack, and just work. And to take that a degree further, there's a built-in USB port right here that doubles as a 5 gigabit Ethernet connection. So even if you don't have a network connection available on your laptop, you can literally just get a USB port, plug it in here, it's USB-C, plug it into your laptop, and it emulates a network switch. And so you can edit directly off of this NAS over USB. And finally, showing that this is absolutely designed for live production and rack mounting, it also has a built-in 12-volt power supply on the back. So even if you're running off of a battery system, you don't have to get an AC inverter. You can just power it directly off of DC 12 volt, which is absolutely a very common standard in video production. All right, well now let's go ahead and boot it on up and I'll show you it's actually surprisingly quiet. That's it. Once it boots up and finishes, it's very, very, very quiet. Easily able to be on a film set. There's a lot of lights that actually make way more noise than this. And right now, as it's plugged in, it is drawing about 85 watts and does not get too much more than that when it's actually getting a full draw. And the other thing, as I said earlier, there's no power button. The software has no way to shut down. The menu system has no way to shut it down. The only thing I can understand that you're supposed to do with this is unplug it. And this is really a completely different beast than anything I've gotten to work with before. I would love to open this thing on up and check and see how the disk modules are set up, because as you can see, no hot swapping bays or anything like that. But as they did send it to me for free and I do have to send it back, I don't want to accidentally strip off the wrong screw or anything like that. So I am leaving it in a nice case just because this unit is about $7,000 US, which is not terrible considering how it does come with 12 NVMe drives, 24 terabytes of total storage, and 100 gigabit Ethernet. But it's also not something I want to accidentally mess up just in case. So what we're going to go ahead and do, I'm going to go ahead and grab my laptop. We're going to hook it up to my desktop and my laptop, all with the built-in 10 gigabit ports on the back. So we won't have any kind of need for running through a network switch or anything like that. And we're going to go ahead and show you how the software control works. Pretty funny. And we'll also go ahead and get some of the speeds out of it. As I said, I unfortunately was unable to get that 100 gigabit connection to work because it only supports true 100 gigabit, not 4x 25 gigabit like I've got here. But we'll still be able to at least push and pull files pretty quick, though we won't be able to get to the theoretical 10 gigabytes of data that this thing could do, at least based off of its networking stats. All right, so in this absolute mess of cables, what I've got is one of my cables going to my desktop over here, one of them going into a 10 gigabit dongle directly into my laptop. So neither one of these are going to have actual internet passing through them. They're just going to be direct connected, and it just works very easily. And then we'll also go ahead and just show you how this works in a actual setup on my laptop here. Then we'll go ahead and plug it in, show you the settings, and just see the performance. Okay, so right here, this is the unit. I've currently got the 24 terabyte version, which is about $6,500 US. And spec-wise, it doesn't have that much info. We have no idea how much RAM, CPU, whatever is in there. And honestly, for stuff like this, that's okay. What we want to know is how fast it actually is. But I do also kind of want to just show how this thing works because I think it's pretty fascinating. So this is really set up for on-set work. And that is really what it is for. So it also does have a built-in kind of proxy setup where multiple computers can automatically build proxies from watch folders. It is all really integrated into it. And so this right here is the actual output of the screen. And so we can actually kind of just see what things are getting fragmented, what things are getting read, what things are getting written to, and kind of tell how full we are, as well as how fragmented our drives are. The more fragmented your drives are, the slower it's going to be, especially from a video editing perspective. However, we are talking about NVMEs here, where fragmentation is not that critical. Really what's actually useful on the screen is the sides. How much space total you've got, your cloud sync status, so that's back into like Google Drive, who is pulling what, your power supplies, and your networking. So basically everything but the main screen, but let's be honest here, they had to pick something to put in there. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and log into it, and I'm going to just about guarantee that this is completely different than any other NAS you've seen in a long time, because this NAS does not have a web managed user interface at all. And in fact, defaults to only being able to be managed over USB, that you can manage it over Ethernet. So I'm gonna go ahead and power it up. Try not to knock too much over. And the other thing about this thing is it boots remarkably quick. There's very little actually going on OS-wise. I mean, it's a pretty simple operating system. So it boots within, I want to say about 15 seconds. And so I'm going to tell you as soon as, yep, we got network indicator lights. So our network should be up, and I'm going to reopen Blackmagic. We do have a display out over there, and it is up. So, I mean, it boots far faster than any other NASs, and this stuff does matter a lot more when you are on set. So now you're going to see the remarkably limited settings we do have. So I was able to create a username and password, but that is only if you are connecting via Ethernet. If you are direct connected to the front of it, you get full access. For a system like this, I think it makes sense. Obviously, this is a NAS designed for one thing only, production. It is not designed to be actually running as an office file server and having super secure files on it. It is really focused on having video files and having the ability for somebody to plug in to manage it if they need to. Here we have very few options. We can name it, set the static IP address. Now note, this only appears to be one of the IP addresses. There are a total of 5 options you've got on here with a 100 gig connection. I'm not sure which one this pulls or how this actually works, but you can have multiple connections, but it does not appear like you can configure any of them but the first one. And interestingly enough, this obviously has to actually pass some kind of security requirements because you have the ability to actually generate a signing request and import a signed SSL certificate, which, considering how it's so bare bones, is clearly designed to survive audit reports from any enterprises, which if you're not aware of, it's actually a huge requirement for anybody who's producing films for like Netflix, Amazon Prime, or any of those big companies. There's a lot of auditing that goes into it. And so even though this really does never use the certificate for anything I've found, it's still got to have it because it's still got to pass those audits. For example, if we go to this in our web browser, this is the only thing we see. I've not found anything else on there, but that is all the certificate would be used for. But once again, it has to pass those audits for those production companies, and so that is what it's used for. There is the Cloud Sync, which has 3 different options. You can go to Blackmagic Cloud, Dropbox, or Google Drive. All these are great ways of backing up for production because that also gives you the ability to share them out in their specific ways and be working on them in multiple places. And so that's why it's really focused on a sync rather than a backup, though it does kind of work as a backup in this case. Storage-wise, you've got 2 options. Format it or set it up as read-only, and that is it. Then security, they do have the ability to create different users. Actually, by default, guest, when you first set it up, is the only account and actually just lets anybody on the network work. And that is kind of how it starts off working, which is once again designed for closed networks that are very secure and non-critical files. Who's going to care if somebody gets footage from the news, if they've broken in and gotten a Ethernet jack in there? You're not going to care that much compared to what it went through to get that footage, because in general, production companies don't have that secure footage on there. And so having guest enabled by default is okay in those cases. I would recommend that guest has no access, but if you're really just looking for this to be plug and play, that is your option there. There is a setup here for shared folders that, I'll be honest with you, I've just not figured out how to create yet. So I've not figured out how we can create additional shared folders in any way. It seems like there is a way to do it, but I've just not been able to find the way just yet. Once again, these things are very new. And so just because you can't do it right now as I'm looking at it, does not mean that's how it is going to be. We are on a very initial version of this entire ecosystem, and I do expect them to grow it out fairly. But that's pretty much it. There's no real web management. It's all managed through this app, and it works really easily. If you ever used any Blackmagic products before, they all work very similarly, and that is a good thing. So now we can go into Finder, and we can see it just shows up right here. And so here are some of my footages that I've been using to test with it. What I'm going to go ahead and do here is I'm going to go ahead and do a pull test. So I've got 10 gig to both computers, and we're just going to pull some big files on both of them and see what happens. All right, so what we're going to go ahead and do is I have both of these hooked up via 10 gig. let's just go ahead and copy one of these large files to one of these large files to the other to simulate 2 gigabytes of file transfer theoretically. I am pulling different files from each of them, and they are both sticky right at 1 gigabyte plus per second. And according to the built-in monitor, we are pulling 17 gigabit of throughput right now, which honestly is about as fast as I've seen macOS be able to handle it on each of these. We are basically saturating 2 of these 10 gigabit connections, all while still pulling only 75 watts of power. I have no clue. I'm not able to test much faster than this. I have done 2 tests where I'm copying and downloading at the exact same time. They worked flawlessly. I've not been able to scratch the surface of this thing with that reason. So honestly, this thing has a ton of performance internally. And I bet even though it might not be able to actually hit that 10 gigabytes a second for a single computer, or even probably for multiple computers, it's probably not that far off. I have not really messed with a NAS that is just this quick right off the bat. And when you've got a file system that is set up like this, where it's probably using like ext4 or something similar, that is honestly going to be faster than any kind of your copy on write or checksum file systems, because it doesn't care about file integrity that much, which for video production you actually do not, believe it or not, you are going to be able to get these numbers. So I gotta say, it's pretty impressive what this thing is able to do, all while not drawing that much power. I mean, 75 watts for a NAS this powerful is pretty impressive and honestly pretty quiet. While I don't think this NAS is for very many people at all, I think it is a really cool product, and Blackmagic always likes their really interesting solutions, and I'm interested to see where it goes from here. I would like to still see the ability to add in some kind of RAID in there, but that's just me. I understand that video production houses a lot of times do not want it and do not care, but I would love to see either some RAID, or maybe even you get 2 of these and it does a copy from one to the other automatically every hour or so. Stuff like that just makes sure that you've got the ability to get back up and running instantaneously should anything go wrong, which especially when you're on deadlines and on crunch and stuff is really critical. But overall, I think this is a really cool NAS, and depending on the price point you're looking at, it's actually not too bad, given that it does come with, in this case, 24 terabytes of flash storage. All right, well, that's going to be it for this video. I would love to hear if you used any of this stuff in production down in the comments below, or what your thoughts on. And if you want to hire me, there's a link for that down in the description below. All right, have a good one. Bye.